Look at this. See, this is something right here. This is what I look for. In a busted format, there's a busted deck. What is it and why?
So we're looking at vintage.
Paradoxical outcome, man. See?
Yeah.
Buy them all. Busted card. Bolas's Citadel. See, remember I was like, invest in that. See, it's fucking dirt cheap. Defense grade. $8. Hasn't gone up much. Repeal. Narset part of Veils at $250. Get that fucking thing, dude.
Well, you're talking about an uncommon.
I know, man.
And one of the most open sets probably in the last 10 years.
Oh yeah.
War of the Spark?
Yeah, that was a really good set. So I don't know, man. Like, this is the way that I always look at investing in cards is like the exact opposite of probably how most people do it. Like, if I'm looking for a card to invest in modern, right? Oh shit, I think I clicked on an ad.
You did.
Back. I got you. Like, people might look at the lists in modern and you'll see, you know, a whole bunch of shit. We see Death Shadow right here, so people might look at this and say, hey, look, man, Death Shadow's a really busted card. You know, you look at this deck, this placed second in a very big tournament here. So, like, Drown in the Loch, I'm going to revisit that one in a minute. But, like, Once Upon a Time, you might be thinking, like, hey, that's a really good card, which it is. Traverse the Uvenwald, like, all these powerful cards in modern, right? If you ever think about, like, cards, the way I look at cards to invest in modern is, like, what modern legal cards are being used and abused in vintage? Because there's just clearly not enough cards out there in modern yet to really put this card to the test and really break it, but there is in vintage. Like, there's a lot bigger of a pool. So I drew your attention to Drown in the Loch because I actually do the same thing for Legacy. Like, I check out Legacy, and
it's getting played.
Yeah, it's like Drown in the Loch is being played. I'm just going to pull up one of the bigger tournaments here. I'm not sure exactly what this is, but yeah.
Grixis, I bet it has it.
Oh, yeah, that one's good too, by the way. Occasition. Jeez, look at this. 4-color control. It's got to be in here somewhere. I think I saw it earlier. Yeah, Drown in the Loch in 4-color control. So, like, you wouldn't think because it's an uncommon. You're like, oh, no, I'm going to invest in the rares and the stuff that's, like, really big in modern. Like, sure, this might only be worth 69, 70 cents right now. But, I mean, you see what happened to what we were just talking about in our set, Part of Reveals. It's theoretically just as common as this card, and it's $250. Like, you know, at 70 cents, if they don't reprint Drown in the Loch for a while, like, could be a $5, $10 uncommon. Like, you never know. We saw it happen with Serum Visions, which was printed as a common. You know what I mean?
Well, you talk about Veil of Summer, which was a $8 uncommon, printed in the same set.
It's used everywhere. Like, it's used everywhere, man. There's so much text to that card. It's already $4.
Well, it was more than that.
Wow.
It dropped after it got banned in 3 formats.
Jeez.
It's only legal now in Modern and in Vintage and Legacy. You can't play it in Standard. You can't play it in Pioneer. And it went from almost $8 down to $4. So there's certainly precedent for an imprint uncommon to have value. Certainly Drown in the Loch is going to be more powerful in older formats where your opponent's inherently going to have cards in the yard.
Wow. Yeah, there's so much to that card, and to push it over the top, it's an instant. Like, you know what I mean? A card like that kind of has to be.
Yeah,
reactionary. But yeah, I mean, it theoretically could be a sorcery. Like, hey, I want to play something that you can't counter, or I want to see what you've got in your hand, so I'm going to play this now and see what you got to say about it. But the fact that that's an instant just makes it so much more powerful.
So something that came up actually in a local tournament, and I'm thinking about it now. Somebody tried to, I can't remember what it was. They tried to target me with something. And I cast Veil of Summer, and they're like, oh, that's only blue or black spells. And I looked at it real quick, and I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Read it again. Draw a card if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. Okay. That's fine. Next line. Spells you control can't be countered this turn. You and permanents you control have hexproof from blue and black until this turn. So
he goes to counter something. You play that. You're going for the hidden ability there.
Yeah.
So how did that play out? Did you you're like, oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I played it.
I played it.
He tried to resolve his spell, and then that was it.
No, he was just like, I don't think you want to play that. I'm trying to think of what it was now that wasn't. But, I mean, I guess, corner case, this can stop mana tide.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's insane. Well, it can also stop just stupid stuff, like scheming symmetry. Like, people try to use that as a one-sided tutor. Yeah. Or, even if you don't, it's a pretty powerful card in a lot of formats, which I also think is very underrated right now. But Veil of Summer stops that too. Like, not only is it a black spell, but, it targets. Yeah, exactly. Like, it targets you. So, on a lot of levels, it stops that. So it's kind of like cards like that I look for.
Drawn on the Lock. 69. Well, let's see. We're talking about paper, TCG Player, $1.25. A lot of people go through TCG Player.
So this card says, counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Or, you can choose one, destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So in a card where you're, people are fetching and playing spells very, very early, it's kind of like Scred in the sense where it always stays ahead of the curve. Like, if it's turn 2, they likely have 2 or more cards in their graveyard at that point, if not just from fetch lands.
Legacy,
yeah, exactly. And, the more broken Modern gets and the more broken Pioneer gets over time, the more that's going to be relevant too,
I was listening to somebody talk the other day about Pioneer and theorizing that now that Pioneer is arguably, Wizards may push that to be their premier competitive format for non-rotating formats. Like they always want you to buy the newest cards, but Modern is subject to the reserve list. So
Modern is subject to the reserve list?
Well, there are cards that you can't, aren't there?
In Modern? No, Modern doesn't have any reserve list cards.
There are no reserve list cards that are Modern legal.
No reserve list cards that are Modern legal.
Sorry.
Yep.
This is where I'm going in my head.
Yep.
They want Modern to be the new Vintage or Legacy. And they don't want those things to have a reserve list. So the theory that I'm hearing is Pioneer is the new Modern. Modern is going to be the new Legacy. Will they print not reserve list cards, but other powerful Legacy pieces into Modern?
Here's the problem with that, right?
Yeah.
Here's the problem with that argument as a whole, I think. And maybe it's not a problem. Maybe I'm overlooking something. But if you think about it, when they've been feeling this way about Legacy for a very long time. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's why they started up Modern in the first place, mm-hmm. right? It's because they felt this way about Legacy. And here we are some number of years later. I mean, what is it? 10, 15 years later? I don't know, 10 years later at least. And now Modern has as much sets in it right now as Legacy did when Modern was released. Mm-hmm. And now they're feeling the same type of way about Modern. So it's like, at what point does this stop? Where it's clear, especially with the new sets that have been printed and the power level of cards in them, it's very clear that the longer you go down the chain, 10, 15 years down the chain, formats are just going to get so busted that you can't ban everything that's busted. You can't attack everything that's busted in it.
I don't know. They've been doing a pretty good job this year.
They sure have in Pioneer, but just think about this. Jace the Mind Sculptor was really busted in Modern. So was
Jace
Stone
busted
Forge
in Modern?
I think when it was released, so when Modern came out, it definitely was.
I started playing just after Modern started, and I know Modern started with a banned list right off the bat.
Yep.
That was cards that they knew were too good.
Exactly. Skull
So
Clamp,
where did-
Jace.
Right. So Jace was too good in standard. They banned it preemptively in modern, right? So 10 years later, they release it into modern when there's a big enough card pool that it can't be a big fish in a small pond anymore.
Which is true. I think, you know, when you get to the point where you unban cards like Jace the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge Mystic, like...
And they have almost no impact.
Yeah, and they have almost no impact. Like, your format is so diverse, you're going to run into this same problem no matter what format you have out there, the more sets that are in it. You know, I think Stoneforge, personally, if you look at it, it really is a busted card. Like, you know, does it have any impact in the format right now? Absolutely not. And here's the reason. There's no busted equipment cards. Like, if Batterskull is the best thing you've got for an equipment card, it's really not that broken. Like, it's really, that card is pretty fair. Like, it's a you know, it's kind of a pain in the ass for most decks that, you know, it's really good against. You know, most decks in general, it's really just hard to deal with a 4/4 Vigilance lifelink on the board turn 3. Like, it's really tough. It just brings you right back in the game. But it's not busted. Like, even putting it into play turn 3 in the modern format is not busted. It's the things that Stoneforge can't do right now that makes it not busted. Like
the potential.
Right. Like, Stoneforge is a very busted card. I mean, if they go, you know, they've pretty much pigeonholed themselves in the modern format. They cannot release a busted equipment now. Like, they couldn't bring Living Weapon back with an equipment that costs 11 mana and says, you know, equipped a creature gets +11/+11 and trample, because then you'd have Tinker Colossus in modern. You know what I mean? Like, they've kind of pigeonholed themselves with unbanning, you know, Stoneforge Mystic. Like I said, I don't disagree with it. I think you should unban. I think they should unban a lot more stuff in modern. Make it as busted as you want. Much like what you were saying, I fully support it being the new legacy. Great, go that direction. But just keep in mind, like, this tends to happen. You see this pattern happen so much, where, you know, a format gets expensive, it gets busted.
Might be an exaggeration. So we're only in our second non-rotating format, like post Vintage and Legacy, that are anything goes, anything from Magic with some restrictions or whatever. Right? So you have Commander, where it's basically anything goes. Vintage and Legacy, cards from everything are pretty much legal. So modern was the first long or modern non-rotating format. So this has only really happened twice.
Has it, though? Because if you look at Extended, that's kind of gone out now.
Yeah, Extended died before it was born.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I don't think it had a lot of support, but I think the people who were proponents of it were the people who didn't want to invest in Vintage and Legacy and wanted their standard investments to sort of get more life. You know what I mean? And eventually, you know, that kind of fell by the wayside because modern came into play, a non-rotating format, which, you know, it's great. It's my favorite format. I love modern. But now it's like we were talking about. There's just as many sets in modern now as there was in Legacy when modern came out. And it's like, I don't see how that pattern will change personally. Like, I say it's happened so much. I should say it's happened enough where you can see the pattern. Like, you have 2 or 3 or 4 really good data points to show you the direction that that's going. Like, you know, you have, you know, sort of a half point, I guess, would be Vintage and Legacy. Like, if you look at the minor differences between those, I can't speculate as to why they created Vintage and Legacy. It was a bit before my time, and like why there was a differentiation between that. But clearly, there were some really busted, powerful cards that were allowed in Vintage that people just didn't want to either pay for and or go up against and have your games last, you know, one or 2 turns and, you know, it's over. So, you know, there was that. So basically what you see there in general is a certain subset of cards that are busted. So a new format is put in place to cycle them out, right? To sort of replace that format eventually. So then Extended, we've kind of talked about that. But then you see Modern, which sort of does the same thing. It's a new non-rotating format that's meant to sort of break up the fact that, oh shit, we didn't think about dual lands and the reserved list and what that would do to card prices. Nobody wants to pay those busted card prices and deal with these busted cards that are in Legacy. Let's make Modern. Here we are some number of years later. Modern can be really, really busted. And, now we have Pioneer to be like, all right, well, how about, the more modern cards? You know what I mean? And I think based on what we've seen, eventually unless something drastic changes, the same thing will happen to Pioneer in so many years. Who knows? I mean, it could be, that could happen. It could not. I've noticed that some people, from what I understand, some people are kind of leery about investing in Pioneer cards right now. A, because they're getting banned every week, but B, because how do you really know what's going to happen if Pioneer is going to be a very popular format, or if people will kind of see the pattern like what we're talking about and just go to Modern.
I think both of those are pretty easily addressed though, because Wizards has already announced the first 3 big major tournaments for next year that are the actual Wizard tournaments are Pioneer. They're saying the first 6 months of major tournaments, it's going to be 50% Pioneer.
Jeez.
The other thing that I would say is, as far as the investing is, they've now decided that they're not going to announce any bans until January. They're not going to announce any major bans until after the New Year tournaments start, and they're not going to do every Monday weekly bans. They feel like they've caught up enough with the most degenerate combo decks and the cards that. So you had the Green Devotion decks; those were totally overwhelming. The only thing that could keep up with it were the Oko decks.
Yep.
The Oko decks kept everything else down. They took care of Devotion for the most part. Now they've taken out Oko and Nexus. And from everything that I'm seeing online, looking at the winning deck lists, following YouTube and all the content producers, the thing that I hear more than anything is, I've played against the same deck twice. I get in a league, I might see the same deck twice. I might see Mono Black twice, or I might see the Lotus Storm combo deck twice. But I can play 2 leagues and see 11 different decks.
Oh yeah, for sure. I wonder how much that has to do with it just being a new format. There's, these are the types of formats where experimentation really pays off. Having a meta-breaking deck. I mean, this is really diverse. I'm looking at the David Purcell's list from Star City Games, IQ, and Duluth. And, this is basically 10 different decks right here. Yeah, we got 8 decks. It's Blue-Red Aggro, Boros Aggro, Golgari Aggro, Naya Zoo, Devotion to Simic, Cruel Aggro, Mono Black Aggro, Rakdos Aggro.
Well, there's definitely a theme.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. You see what I mean? But this is exactly the pot is brewing right here for some meta-breaking deck. This is, I think there's so many different decks because...
Well, and so as much as your hesitation as far as investing in Pioneer on say that the average person might be concerned about a banning or not knowing what deck is going to be good, now is the chance to take penny stocks and flip them 1,000%.
I'll agree with you, because I didn't say you shouldn't invest in Pioneer.
And I just looked it up because I didn't know. August 12th, 2001. That's when Modern started. So Modern hasn't even been around 10 years.
August 12th, 2001?
Sorry, 2011.
Oh, okay. I was like, all right.
We will edit that out, maybe.
Not keep it.
Yeah, 2011.
So yeah, not even 10 years.
Not even really 9 years.
Okay, so that's even more I think that.
So it took 9 years for them to get to the point where
it's busted. Modern is. I mean, I shouldn't say Modern's busted. I believe the exact opposite. I believe Modern is the most healthy format because of how busted it can be, and because of, at the same time, how busted it really isn't. You know what I mean? There are some really busted decks in it that are just so not fun to play against, but there's also decks that are really fun to play, and it's a very diverse format. And I think that further proves the point that it didn't even take 10 years for that to happen. It took about 8 years. 8-9 years just about for that to happen. And, we're now at a spot where Wizards is doing what they need to do by printing these more powerful sets, these more powerful cards, more powerful mechanics, and then they just kind of play right into the strategies of some older ones and make them even more powerful. So I think we'll continue to see that, unless I'm overlooking something. Like, do you think that the mechanics that they're doing these days are sort of set them apart from the mechanics that have happened in the past? Like, for example, I'll kind of illustrate what I'm trying to talk about. If you look at the new one with Adventure, it's an entirely different and very unique mechanic versus mechanics such as modular, where modular, it has really no regard for any other set or like any other like a creature that might be an artifact and have 1/1 counters on it from another set. You know what I mean? Like, they kind of could play in together.
That's what you're saying. So
Adventure can't really interact with like any other happenstance. It's like exiled and it has its own ability from exile. I think they're kind of doing their best to take it out of the game as much as they can. Maybe that's the direction that they're moving, and maybe that will change the course of Pioneer. It's something I thought about as well.
I think that, and not for a confusing terminology, but I don't want to say modern Magic, but in recent Magic, they've played around a lot more with the exile zone. I mean, you can go back to processing and say you were dealing with exiling there, but it seems like there's way more things now that can go and come back from exile versus exile used to be you just disappeared forever.
Yes.
And I think, that referring to parasitic mechanics or mechanics that are only good with themselves. I think people like to call them parasitic mechanics instead of incestuous mechanics because they want to avoid the language. But yeah, those adventure cards don't necessarily work with cards from any other set, but there's really no interaction that would need them to. It's just a form of card advantage, like split cards,
right?
Commit to memory, that sort of thing.
Oh, exactly. Well, it's that's what we think right now too. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I just had to look up on my phone the card that I sent you the other day because I couldn't remember it. But Tainted Pact, for example, that was a card that it was in. The reason I invested in that card, I bought a ton of that card when it was super low. I saw it in some Doran the Siege Tower deck in Commander, and I thought it was genius. The guy only ran one of each basic land and one, obviously, of any other card that wasn't a basic land. So I said, no shit, like, this guy has completely gamed the system. Anything he rips is not going to be the same name as anything else exiled. I'm like, this is insane. But now if you look at it these days where there's, much like you said, a bigger focus on the exile zone, it's like, at what point does that card become so broken because you just don't even care what gets exiled? Because that zone is so utilized by newer cards or newer mechanics. And I think that's kind of where we're going with that. Like, all it's going to take is, a card that says, you may play cards from exile that you own this turn, at the end of the turn, you lose the game or something like that. Yeah. And then you play a Tainted Pact, the turn before that or something. Like, God, that's a vicious combo. It's something that they won't necessarily think of, in future sets. Like, I mean, that's obviously a very powerful card that, one that I speculated could be printed. I'm not sure if they ever will print something like that, but it's the point of that.
So Tainted Pact is 1 and a black instant. Remove top card of your library from the game. You may put that card into your hand unless it has the same name as another card removed this way. Repeat this process until you put a card into your hand, or you remove 2 cards with the same name, whichever comes first. So you're exiling cards off the top of your deck until you get the one you want. Yep. Is that the theory?
Yeah, it's a tutor.
It's a tutor. But you have to exile the whole portion of your deck up to the card, or down to the card you want.
Right.
And is legal in Commander, Vintage, and Legacy.
And the cool part about it, though, is it's not for like a specific card. You don't have to name a card. You don't have to.
It's just wherever you get there.
Yeah, you could. I mean, I could say, all right, like I've exiled a good 70% of my deck, which will set me up for this combo or something. Like, you know what I mean? I think that the unknown factor there is you do take those cards and you put them in an entirely different zone. Like, they're not. You don't have to rifle through those cards again. It's kind of. That might not make any sense, but like what I'm trying to say is all it was going to take is something that will abuse that exile zone or give you the ability to get some value out of that exile zone, such as, the Eldrazi that had what is the mechanic called that they process things from exile. Like that gives you some serious play there. Take a card from exile and put it into your graveyard. Like, well, Jesus, man. Like, that's even just simple stuff like that. All it takes is just one little thing to make that card pretty, suddenly even more valuable than you ever thought it would be. I was surprised to see that card at $20, to tell you the truth. I had to start selling some of my playsets.
Talking about Pioneer and the things that might break out into Pioneer and how people are trying to port their standard decks into Pioneer. Adventures is a deck in Pioneer.
Oh, for sure.
Wasteland Strangler takes a card an opponent has from exile and puts it into their graveyard. So,
wow.
If you want to send that Love-Struck Beast on an adventure, I'm gonna kill your Beauty and the Beast beauty, your 1/1, and put this guy in your graveyard.
Yeah, it adds so much value to a card like that. That's so much more value now. And it's for, the Wasteland Strangler is the same mana cost as what it would cost to bring your Beast back out. So if you don't just slam that turn 3, or if your opponent went first or something like that, they're going to take that out of exile before you ever get a chance to use it. Granted, you've already kind of got some advantage by having a 1/1, because Love-Struck Beast is just a sweet card. Yeah. But I think there's just so many things that you can't think of. If you are a designer, you're a card creator from Wizards. Like, there's so many mechanics that you would never see coming.
Well, and so is the point of Pioneer, because they've had to, as much as they say they don't acknowledge all the competitive formats when they design Standard, they have to be at a point now where, say, Modern Humans, when they design a set now, they absolutely have to consider how many humans they're putting in the set and what that's going to do to Modern, even though they might say that they don't play test for it. So is starting another non-rotating format like Pioneer them saying, okay, we know that we need to acknowledge these non-rotating formats and we can't worry about that. Like, when they made Narset, they didn't think, okay, somebody's going to exile something to an LED and play Narset on 1 and hose their opponent that was counting on a brainstorm or whatever.
Right.
Like, they don't think about it in Vintage.
Yeah, oh, absolutely not.
So is this, and this is why I say, are they going to print Wasteland into Modern?
I think they should. Yeah, I really think they should. It's not a fun card to play against. If they bring Wasteland in, they got to bring in Stifle. They got to bring in something to stop it or to make your Wasteland player think. But I think probably for those reasons they won't. Like, but the reason I think personally they would never bring Wasteland or any sort of strip mine thing to any newer formats is mainly because out of all the studies they've done, one of the biggest, most discouraging things for any Magic player is not being able to play their spells. That's like the most discouraging thing. So I think they're kind of trying to
confirm.
Yeah, can confirm. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have been there before, where you're just in a spot where either you're not ripping any land and the game is just suddenly not fun. Like, what your deck can do, and even if it's just client side, like on your side, you don't have any lands to play your spells. It's not fun. It's even less fun when someone is blatantly destroying and ripping away your land, and you're just sitting there like, oh, this is so dumb. You're beating me in such a cheesy way.
Well, it's the same thing with just counter magics. The strength, that massive reduction in strength of counter magic was, I want my spell to resolve. I don't care if you kill it after, but psychologically it feels better for me to have the creature resolve, right, or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
And so they dumb down counterspell and in all of its various 3 and 4 mana forms.
Right. Oh, absolutely. But it feels better as a player when you've played this Love-Struck Beast if you get it Doombladed than if you get it countered. Like, it just feels psychologically better. You played your spell, you had your chance, and my opponent had the answer. You know what I mean? As opposed to, I can't even play anything. I'm asking permission to play this game. Like, You know,
What do you got up here?
oh man, I was just checking out some of these decks. In Pioneer, we're looking at a Gruul aggro list right now, and it's just some of these cards that you can easily look back on and be like, yeah, I knew that card was good when it was printed, such as Ronus the Indomitable, Mizium Mortars, Domri Rod, Gore Clan Rampager. Like, we all knew these cards are good, like, when they got printed, but all it took was just a little format like this, like a new format like this, to come in and really bring some new life to these cards.
One of the things that I like to look for in a lot of these, especially new decks, when people are testing for an event like this. So this was the Star City Games IQ in Duluth. We're still looking at those decks. I look at the sideboard because these guys were testing, and they had this concept of what the metagame might be. Now, one, obviously Pioneer's wide open, so they might be thinking, what has the most broad utility? But they're also probably looking to say, X is going to get played. And it might just be aggro. And so it's really interesting to me to see in this Gruul aggro deck, the top 3 cards in the sideboard are Fog.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm going to race a motherfucker.
It's so crazy to think about, man. I used to play a mill deck in Modern, as you know, and one of the cool techie sideboard cards was the Black Fog, Darkness.
Yeah.
Like, it blew my mind. That card was like $7 or $8 at one point. It might be, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's more or less now, but it blew my mind to think that all black needed was just a fog. You know what I mean? And it really brings to attention how powerful effects like that are.
Darkness.
Oh, absolutely. How much is it worth now?
I'm just trying to find it. There's so many cards that are Grasp of Darkness, Allure of Darkness, but not just Darkness. Let me go back to Gatherer.
Oh, no worries. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Fog, the ability on Fog, it was really good back in the first few sets, when it was like Alpha, Beta, Unlimited. Fog was insane. I think we're back to a point now where Fog is really good. For 1 mana in a fully aggro set like this, Fog says take an extra turn after this one for 1 mana. It says you don't die this turn, take an extra turn after this one.
Well, and especially in black. Nobody's going to see that coming.
Oh, absolutely.
And Modern legal, Legacy legal, Vintage, Commander, and Pauper legal. It's clearly a common. At least a common online, printed in Legends and Time Spiral.
Mm-hmm. It was those, I think it comes out as a rare when it was printed in Time Spiral because it was one of those time-shifted cards. I think those came out at like the rare spot. But yeah, the Fog effect, man, it has survived the test of time. Well, and here we are again, Fog.
Yeah. in an aggro deck, green-red deck that just says, okay, I'm going to swing in, you're going to swing back, I'm going to negate your attack, and I'm going to kill you next turn. Like, especially when people think that they have you in the abyss, like, you're going to have to chump block because this is a lethal attack. I expect not too many people are playing around the Fog out of another aggressive deck.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool tech.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's one of those next level cards, too, where, how many times have you been in a situation where you're like, my only out here is if my opponent blocks improperly or if my opponent blocks at all. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, then they don't have enough to crack me back lethally. I wonder how many times that comes into play when you have Fog and you're like, you can feign that so much as a high-level Magic player. You can say, okay, it looks as though my only out here is for him to screw up. So you swing all in, and they're like, yeah, I'm not dead, so I'm going to take it. And then they crack you back with everything and get fogged. Like, that is such a next-level play, man. Like, it might be one simple card, like 1 mana, very simple text, but I'm telling you, it opens the way up for some real next-level plays. So you've also brought up Shaper's Sanctuary here.
Another 1 mana card out of the sideboard. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. I bet that comes up a lot against the Hardened Scales decks, all the people that are trying to play Walking Ballista, thinking about target of spell or ability. That could also hose the blue-white Spirits decks, even blue-white Control if they're counting on that Teferi to put something back in your hand and give them enough time until they can Supreme Verdict.
Oh, absolutely. It blows my mind that card is still $1.50, $2.
And that's now to say, Ixalan is how far back in time? I mean, it's only a rotation away, really. So there's still a lot of them out there. So that might be one to pick up now at $1.50 in a year as a $5 card.
Oh, absolutely. One other card that was printed recently that we kind of alluded to investing in Pioneer, and that I have I believe this is the card I'm gonna throw a lot of eggs in the basket for, and that's Dreadhorde Arcanist. It's a
little pricey. I mean,
it's still like $5. It's still a $5 card, but again, you remember me talking about my strategy of going to Legacy and Vintage, and looking at what cards are abused. And I mean, that is in Legacy decks. It's in Vintage decks. The card is such insane card advantage. It's literally everything that Young Peasy, the other 2-drop red, ever wanted to be. You know what I mean? I read something somewhere once about someone was talking about the best 2-drops ever printed in a given color. You know, they said this was the time that Young Peasy got printed, and they said they finally done it for red. Mm-hmm. You know, for green it was Tarmogoyf, for blue it was Snapcaster Mage, for black it was Bob.
Was White Thalia?
White was Stoneforge Mystic.
Oh.
You know, they printed all of these busted, cards for 2 mana in all of these different colors, and they're like, what does red have? And, you know, they made the argument for Young Peasy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I guess it's one of those things where you're like, I don't know. I don't believe it. I'll know it when I see it. Dreadhorde Arcanist to me is the
truth.
That's when I see it. Like, now I've seen it. Like, that's the 2-drop right there that I think is really being slept on right now. And it's because, you know, it's a very aggressive format, and that card generally is favored in like either tempo or more control-y matchups, which maybe in Pioneer right now you don't see a lot of you don't see a lot of control decks, but you definitely don't see that strategy. You know what I mean? If they're playing red, they're playing, you know, lightning bolt effects, or they're you know, playing very aggressive styles, and the Dreadhorde Arcanist really forces you to make those next level plays with your 1-drop spells. You know what I mean? To really put that card to push it to its limits. I think it's really being slept on right now, especially in an aggressive format where you could have multiple colors, 1-drop answers to spells, to creatures, and as soon as you know, if you answer your opponent's creature on 1 or 2 with a 1-drop spell, you get that back with Dreadhorde Arcanist. It's on your turn 2.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, on your turn's 3. Has to swing.
Yep.
Because it's an attack trigger. You know why Dreadhorde Arcanist has trample, don't you?
Why does it have trample? So you can't...
so that you can become immense it, attack, play Become Immense. Because the casting cost of Become Immense is exactly the power of Dreadhorde Arcanist after you.
Why doesn't Gruul Aggro do this?
So,
yeah, that is. I didn't even think of that. That is insane.
So Become Immense is 6, gives it +6/+6. Okay.
Yeah.
Dreadhorde Arcanist becomes a 7/9, and then you just flash it back and make it a 13.
Oh my god.
13/12 with trample.
That's so nasty.
So maybe there is a sort of a base red splash green.
Potentially, yeah. That sounds like a more combo-y style that you would use that in, which I'm glad you brought it up, because I didn't even mention that style that Dreadhorde Arcanist usually belongs in. Like, you know, usually it's tempo or little control-leaning style decks. This right here, that's a combo. And, like, you don't even think of it. Like, maybe, you know, in those Gruul colors, perhaps you run more Gorklan Rampagers for, you know, reasons such as that. Maybe you have Delve cards. Maybe you have, you know, just these cards that end up in your graveyard that have a higher mana cost. It's all based on his power. Yeah. Which is insane.
How much does Gorklan pump?
How much does he pump?
Yeah, is it +4/+4? I don't remember.
Yeah, it's a +4/+4 Blood Rush cards. He pay a let's explain it to people. It's a Gore Clan Rampager, for those of you who don't know, is a 4/4 creature for 4. It's a green, a red, a 2 colorless, and it has this ability called Blood Rush, where you can pay some amount of mana cost for it to have an effect while it's in your hand. You can discard it and it has that effect. And this Blood Rush cost on Gore Clan Rampager is a red and a green, and it just says a target attacking creature gets +4/+4 and gains trample until end of turn. So there's a card that does that, +4/+2 and trample until end of turn for the same mana cost. I forget what it's called. Colossal Might. So it's a Colossal Might that's even better for the same mana cost that can't be countered, or it can't be countered through traditional means,
that's interesting because it's an effect.
It's an ability, right?
It's an ability on the card. So
so
it's a pump that can't be countered.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I mean, I just think
so. At 5 mana, what's a spell you want to? So I'm thinking, no, Dreadhorde Arcanist is now a 5/7.
I mean, you could cast anything from Hour of Promise to which falls right in those colors, to I'm not sure if you want to get into like a real pumpy version of that combo deck, or if you just want to cast spells that are independently busted. You know what I mean? Because the more you invest in that one creature, like, it's really good to get some damage through, and have that pressure. It's also good to have an independently busted card that you can cast from your graveyard with him, because then you're really diversifying your threats. Like, you're really making it hard to attack you on all of these levels. Like, you're swinging with a dude that, if you're pumping him, through abilities like Gore Clan Rampager or Become Immense, especially in response to something that they're doing, like, because everyone's responding to Dreadhorde Arcanist either when or before he swings. You know what I mean? So, like, if you're doing that and then you're pumping them, and now you're making it even worse for your opponent, it's really hard to attack on all of those levels. Like, get your graveyard and solve a creature, and just deal with all of these threats from all of these different zones. And if he gets off, having these independently busted spells that are coming at you too. Like, it's probably not all of those facets would fit in one deck, but at least, one or two of them would go into one deck that's a nice strategy for just slamming a Dreadhorde Arcanist in there. Yeah, I think.
And so what's Dreadhorde Arcanist cost now?
It's a $5 card. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Rug Delver must run this deck. This is everything Rug Delver wants to do right here. Not this red Rug Delver deck, but there's got to be. Let's go check out some legacy decks. Blue-red Delver. It's got to run that. Just thumbing through some Blue-red Delver lists here. Dreadhorde Arcanist right here. Yeah, so it's in Blue-red Delver, which is a really, really good deck too. It's gone up 21 cents today from what I've seen. I looked at it earlier. It's $5.
I gotta get mine back from Dawson.
But yes, it's one red, one colorless. It's a zombie wizard, so it's a wizard, right? That's a good creature type. Zombie is also not a terrible creature type.
No, they are both noteworthy creature types.
Absolutely, like, it isn't some like frog or weird or something like that.
And you're getting your wizard lightning in play for 1 mana. Then you attack.
I didn't even think of that, man.
Right?
Yeah.
And wizard retort, for that matter.
Oh, absolutely.
So you got your counter spell and your lightning bolt. And Pioneer. I mean, where we don't have, thinking about these older formats where you actually have bolt. But even Blue-Red Wizards in Modern played Wizards Lightning because it's always going to be a bolt.
The only downside to Dreadhorde Arcanist is he can't independently recast those spells. He can help you cast them for 1 or for cheaper, but can't independently recast them.
What do you mean by that?
Like, so his ability only says equal to his power when he swings. So
in
for
the graveyard,
example, in the graveyard, it's a
Wizards
Lightning is a 3 CMC card.
Until you have to Blossoming Defense.
Exactly. But I wonder, like, with all of these, with all of the focus on zombies, such as Death Baron or whatnot, how, this is just me throwing it out there. I'm not saying this is an effective deck, but I wonder how effective it could be to have like a zombie deck that you splash red in for removal or for burn, and you have Dreadhorde Arcanist in there. that's a zombie that's getting pumped by, you know.
This will be a 2/4,
Well,
3/5, and is occasionally recasting your bolts or your fatal pushes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like your bolts, your fatal pushes, but also the other cool thing about Dreadhorde Arcanist is he has a big ass, man. Like, I mean, three is like, you know, there's always that, you know, it dies to bolt argument.
It dies to bolt, but it blocks a Goblin Guide.
Exactly, blocks a Goblin Guide. You know, it's of course it's a little slower than Goblin Guide, but at the same time, like, it's not just gonna die to your typical 2-drop stuff. You know, 2 for 2. It won't die to the vanilla creature that is at the same mana cost, which I think is really important. Yes, it will die to bolt. It will die to, you know, your opponent, you blocking one of your opponent's creatures and then them wasting a card to deal, you know, 1 or 2 damage to it. But at that point, like, you know, you've kind of won out on that battle. Like, you know, it's exactly what Dreadhorde's there to do is give you card advantage.
You know what else works probably well with Dreadhorde Arcanist in Modern? It's Unearth.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, that's really good.
You can unearth this, attack, unearth something else.
Yeah, that's broken, man. That is really broken. You've seen the, speaking of Modern and Unearth, have you seen the deck that uses the, I call him the Jack Skellington card, the Lightning Skelemental and Unearth? That's pretty insane.
The other nice thing about this is, and I just want to point out because I was double checking it, it's cast instant or sorcery card. And so you're in combat casting sorceries. So that breaks some timing restrictions. If there are sorceries that would be particularly nasty in combat, that might also be an angle.
Oh my god. Yep. Such as Scheming Symmetry.
Such as Scheming Symmetry.
Independently cast that card, sorcery at instant speed.
To go and that's looking at Unearth, which is a 1 black sorcery, return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. You could bring back your Wasteland Strangler mid-combat, take something your opponent has from exile, clear their blocker.
It's really good.
There's just a lot of play to it. And any card that has a lot of play to it has that potential to be broken.
Absolutely. And it's much like the example that we were talking about with the white broken 2-drop Stoneforge, is there's other cards that could be printed that would make this card even more busted. Like, it leaves that door open. If you look at all of these cards that are the busted 2-drops, they always leave the door open for other cards that could be printed that make them even more busted than they are right now. Snapcaster Mage. Like, you know, when, for example, Phyrexian Mana, you know, you can cast that off from Snapcaster Mage and pay the Phyrexian mana cost. You know what I mean? Or any spell that they might print out there for 0 that has, you know, a drawback such as the pacts. You know what I mean? Like, those can be cast by Snapcaster. You know, Stoneforge Mystic, I think, has yet to see a great counterpart in a busted equipment, but it could. You know, and I think it's the same with Dreadhorde Arcanist. You know, look at the joke set that they printed that says, you know, you lose the game. You know, a busted card like that for 1 mana. You know, Dreadhorde Arcanist could technically cast that. You know what I mean? It sounds crazy, and you're like, why the hell would you want to do that? But at the same time, like, I say that to illustrate the point that they could print stupid cards like that for 1 mana that just do some busted effect that you're like, I don't really know what I would use that for. And then Dreadhorde Arcanist just kind of helps you redo them. You know what I mean? If it ever does become a combo piece, he's just right in there helping you get a second shot at him. You know, he's a Snapcaster every turn. You know, he's just so busted, man. He's so busted.
We should probably wrap this up for today, but remind me next time. We'll talk about Robber of the Rich.
All right, Robber of the Rich.
Yeah.
You've caught me. I don't know what this card is, but next time I'm really anxious to hear about it and hear what you've got to say about it and learn a lot more about it.
So you're going deep on this?
I would go deep on that, man. Dreadhorde Arcanist. That's
I mean, I'm happy to have my playset, but I'll have to think about that.
Yeah. That's a Snapcaster Mage every turn for $5. You can't tell me that's a bad card, man. That's
Perfect closing statement.